Allora, benvenuti a tutti. Welcome everyone. My name is Matthijs Jonker. I'm the Director of Studies in Art History here at the Royal Netherlands Institute in Rome, the KNIR. And I'm delighted to welcome you here today, everyone who is here in present, on location in the auditorium, and everyone who is online with us today via Zoom for this special event organized by Marianna Maruyama, our artist in residence. The Artist in Residence Fellowship is in Rome is meant for artists working in all media who need to spend 3 months at the KNIR in Rome, working on projects that contribute to the cross-fertilization of the arts and sciences. And the program is established jointly by the KNIR and the Society of Arts within the Royal Dutch Academy of Sciences, the KNAW. And we were, of course, honored to have Mariana Mariama as our artist in residence here this academic year in 2 installments. Mariana is an artist and writer based in The Hague. She works across a range of media and modalities, often with the body and voice, and dealing with presence, physicality, and communication. She is taught at the Dutch Art Institute and the Gerrit Rietveld Academy. Her work has been performed and exhibited in international museums and art festivals. And last autumn, Mariana came to the KNIR in search of local Roman termite colonies as part of her artistic process while working on a book and a film. Her background in experimental translation practices underlines this work, where scientific research and art practices mingle through the interspecies relationships. Termites, for Mariana, are extraordinary beings holding an invaluable position in a city with a remarkable subterranean history and in a world of waning dreams. And last October, Mariana led an excursion here in the Villa Borghese, where she discussed her artistic research process with a group of my students in a course on the history of science, which was a great success. My students found it very interesting and stimulating going with you to have an excursion with you in the Villa Borghese. Now today, you will present her ongoing work, Nile Blue A, in the company of biologist Dr. Silvia Ghesini, who is here on my left, from the University of Bologna, and Vilnius-based curator Virginija Januskeviciute, if I pronounce it correctly, here on my right. I wish you a very happy colloquium, a very happy talk, and I give the floor to you at this moment.
So for speaking, I will take this. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and I'm really happy to be here myself. I want to thank the KNIR for hosting me, first of all, and everyone here who has already made this such a pleasant and enriching experience. So I wish I could stay even longer, but it's been great to be here already. So my name is Marianna Maruyama, and as Matthijs said, I live in The Hague. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I'm doing here, because it sounds strange, perhaps at first, and also a little bit vague. And I know that here in the Institute, specificity and precision is really valued. So I want to try to kind of bridge that gap between this very vague sounding project of me looking around for termites in Rome and the possible outcomes and conversations that might emerge from that process. So this is also part of our process. It's part of my process as an artist. And what I'm presenting to you today is not a final work. I wanted to make that clear. I'm really only partway through. I started a 1.5 years ago with this topic, and I am just still in the middle of many interesting, intriguing, confusing conversations and moments. So I wanted to share some of those moments in drawing in the form of drawings. So that's why some of them are on the floor, and please feel free to have a look, but they're really just a visual anchor for some further conversations. I'm really delighted to be here today with Silvia Ghesini, who's we've been in touch, in contact with, for, gosh, quite a few months already, yeah. And also with Virginija Januskeviciute, sorry, and who we've had many nice conversations, but also worked together with in the past. Virginia as a curator and Silvia as an expert entomologist, biologist and entomologist. So at the end of this conversation, I'd really like to open it up to you also, and also for those of you who are watching online, hello, and hope that you feel free to ask questions and join us. And the format is really just, yeah, us to have a kind of conversation about termites to begin with. So why termites? The way that I work, it's always to throw myself into some topic, something that intrigues me, that will hold and capture my attention for a long period of time. And termites, for some reason, which is still a bit of a mystery to me, really captured my attention towards the end of 2019. I think I was tired of thinking about people and human problems and human social life situations. And termites, for some reason, I found a lot of comfort in thinking about them. I like to always tell this story that I used to, because I lived in Japan for a long time, and I used to imagine these monks meditating in the mountains very peacefully, calmly, and it would calm me down to imagine that they were always there, always meditating and very silently. Any time of day, even in the most panicked moments, that there they were. But something shifted, I think, towards the end of 2019, and I started thinking more about other organisms, and I found termites so incredibly fascinating after reading this book about them by Elisa Marganelli called Underbug. And I started to think about them as my source of comfort, that they were always working deeply underground, underfoot, without us humans paying much attention to them, or without there being any kind of need or obligation from us to them, or vice versa. So yeah, this is something we were just talking about, the three of us, about a kind of interspecies care, and if it's possible to love someone from another species. And I think we can bring that forward as we go on. The question I had from the very beginning when I came to Rome was, where can I find termite colonies in Rome? Because I had heard that they existed, and it's not something that people generally come to Rome for. It's a bit like going to Paris to look for pigeons or something. Like there's some kind of or termites, where actually there are probably more, right? So I think it has something to do, this question has something to do with not accepting this nature culture divide, and trying really hard to get over that. You can come to Rome for the termite culture, you know. I mean, it's also a possibility. So anyway, the question was, where can I find them? And I sometimes get frustrated because I still haven't found them, and I'm still looking for them. I've been here a few months and still haven't seen any termites. But the interesting part of this whole search is what I have found, of course, other than termites. So I hope we can talk about a few of those things. I want to go ahead and open up the conversation. I've told you a little bit about my interest already. So I want to start with asking Silvia, are there termite colonies in Rome?
Yes. When I started studying termites, I was not very aware where I could find them, because people normally, when talking about thinking about termites, think they are mainly tropical insects, and this is true. There are lots of species in the tropics, but a few are also in Europe, can be found in Europe and also in Italy. In Rome, we have two kinds of termites: subterranean termites, which live in the ground mainly, and then they can come out of, from the ground to fetch for food, but the main body of the colony is underground, and they can be very large colonies. And then we have drywood termites, which live also in small pieces of wood. In fact, their colonies are smaller, maybe some thousand individuals, while subterranean termites can be some million individuals in a colony. In Rome, as I said, we have both, but those that are more easy to find probably are drywood termites, which can be found on wooden beams mainly. In Italy, termites are not a big problem because we build mainly with concrete or bricks. We have not many structures of wood, some roofs maybe. So termites can make roofs collapse, but not entire buildings, as it can happen in other countries, for example, United States. So people do not know much about termites in Italy. And in fact, when I started to study them, only 2 species were known in Italy. But studying morphology and particularly DNA, we found many species. So we described the new species. We have now a better understanding of their distribution and of their taxonomy.
Thank you for explaining a little bit about the presence of termites in Rome. And one of the things that interested me in your research was how we can kind of trace the presence of new species, but we still don't know if some of them were have been there for a really long time, right? And some, or if they had appeared recently. It's hard to tell sometimes, right? It's, yeah. And also like that they're kind of creeping up north over time, partly because of climate change, but also because of the heat islands produced by cities, right? Like, which is why we can find them more, and we can find them in Paris, as you said. And
we can think it's a natural distribution because it's a Mediterranean area. But in Northern Europe, termites can survive only in towns or in urban areas where microclimate is warmer. And the question is, as Mariana said, are they native there or were they brought there by men? They were introduced by men. It depends. It's not always easy to discriminate the two situations. it could be possible that in some cities they remained after they came there when the climate was warmer, and then when the climate got colder, they remained there because the microclimate there was still suitable for them, even though in the surroundings it was no more. And it's not always easy to separate the two situations. We're still working on that.
And as opposed to my two colleagues talking here today, I'm not really a fan of insects. And I am easing myself into the subject slowly, but with great interest, because maybe as opposed to, as Mariana, you said that maybe you got into the subject of insects when you got tired of thinking about people and the problems. For me, thinking about people and the problems is what makes me very much interested in insects, because for me, it's inseparable, studying something so unknown to myself, but also I think to scientists and to humans in general, and something that is so difficult to study because it's, I think the life of insects and of termites in particular, from what I learned, the life is very diverse. I learned the species are so diverse as well. But for me, the study is also a study of empathy, because I think empathy is the only way we can ever relate to what is happening there. So for me, a study of termites, for me personally, is a study of the social life of termites and the social life of people at the same time. Because we study them through metaphors, through assigning them different roles, through categorizing them, through taxonomies that we can somehow adapt from our lives to theirs, and then from their lives to ours. And then when we see those lives meet, we don't quite understand what is happening there, and we have no idea what they're thinking about it. But today I learned, for instance, that termites can make umbrellas to protect themselves from wind, which, yes, which completely explodes my mind, and I'm falling in love with creatures that I would never want to meet in my life in person. At the same time, today I learned the question that has been bugging me since yesterday. They do have disagreements, apparently. The species that do live in colonies and they build those enormous complex structures that are still there to understand. And when we still don't know how they agree on how to do things, but apparently it's obvious they do agree. But apparently they also have the disagreements. And Silvia had a beautiful example of studying them and showing them in the labs. And I think we can go into a million of those stories. And for me, as someone who is primarily working with arts, I think, Mariana, your drawings today are something for me, a huge prompt for conversations that can go on for days on end. And for me, a very interesting question today, I guess, maybe even more than empathy, because we can all agree we can empathize with termites, their colonies, and their struggles, but maybe the limits of our imagination, and how you already mentioned before that you have to deal with it as an artist and as somebody who is studying the subject. Also, the way you mentioned that you are moving away from maybe a more literal approach to maybe something either slightly non-linear or something slightly towards the ignorance of the insects, towards that we assume they might have towards us as human species, and so on. So I think limits of imagination, for me, it's something very interesting it would be very interesting to hear how you cope with it, how you deal with it, how you see it in your practice, and maybe in this stage in particular of your work.
Thanks, it's a great question, and because it's true from the beginning, one of the reasons now I've don't want to show you images, photographs of termites is because there is no one termite, for one thing. There are like more than 2,000 species there. Yeah, and they're all different. It's a fiction already to show you a picture of a termite. So that if you don't know what one might look like, so there's already a problem with representation, visual representation. But there's also a problem, I think, with how we talk about these insects. And maybe it's not a problem for everyone, but for me, it's something that that gets under my skin, because we use, like, it's common to use the words like to categorize their roles in the colony, for example, like soldiers, queen, workers, and we assign them these human roles, so it's already anthropomorphized. But we do it because we need to have, like we talked about this, we need to have some kind of agreement about what kinds of things they might possibly be doing. And so among specialists, among scientists, among among specialists, there's an understanding that helps to further the science, but among those who don't know about insects very well, we get stuck with our associations of those things, and the story becomes very different. I think, Virginia, you were saying earlier, we talked about this also, about those associations also having the potential to change. So, I mean, the word queen means something different for different people at different times. So that's also flexible to some extent.
And the worker, what's a worker and what kind of work?
Yeah, what is a work to begin with? I mean, that was a question I had for Silvia. What is work? Do the termites, do they work? Like, so.
Yes, I said it depends on what you mean by work. We humans, when we talk about work, normally mean something we get paid for, but obviously this cannot apply to insects. I think a useful definition of work is something that gets you tired, even though sometimes it can be, it's not unpleasant. For example, think when you go to the gym, it's tiring, but it's relaxing too. So termites work, meaning they do many tasks that can make them tired, because they build a nest, they go fetching food or water, they care for their young. So they do lots of work. But I don't know if they find it unpleasant. I don't think so, but I cannot know actually. So I don't know if they work in our way of feeling it.
Yeah. So already from the beginning, this kind of this kind of terminology and these words that we use to describe something that's other than human becomes really like complex, and for me it's problematic. So for me to go back to your question, like at this stage in my work, I'm really trying hard to resist the temptation to talk about termites in a way that's very like biologically oriented, according to the way that we learned biology, the way that I learned biology when I was younger. I mean, thank God things are changing. Like the way that we talk about biology now is much more interesting, and it's really more open. It's more interdisciplinary. It's more fluid, and there are a lot of different voices coming in. But even 20 years ago, yeah, I think the conversations were different. So I'm trying to resist that temptation, because when you're excited about something, you also want to share all of the facts. You want to share the things that you think are facts, but they're not necessarily helpful for creating the intrigue and mystery of the thing that you really deeply care about. So I guess through this kind of conversation, and I hope through the work that I make, there will be some way to share that that energy, the appreciation for termites, whatever they actually are.
I think at some point yesterday, I remember you mentioning that you made those drawings for termites, and then I learned that termites are blind. So you said that you probably made them for termites to eat and to appreciate them in a very different way. But maybe you want to say something about the color blue that you use in your drawings, and not just maybe the reason for choosing the color, but also what it came to mean to you in your, I could say, even like meditating over the subject of that you're studying.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the blue, color blue, I think it's a color that somehow catches the eye of many artists and writers, and I'm not the only one. Yeah, I can first off the top of my head think about like Derek Jarman's video Blue, or Susan Hiller's Blue Screens of Death. But these are very specific contemporary art references. But I think blue is such an attractive color for me because of the emotional associations from the beginning, from the first point of the word, and the musical associations of the blues, and the depth of that color, the way that you can enter into the sea of blue, and the things, the colors that our eyes filter out. The name of the project comes from this name of a stain that's used in biology, Nile Blue A, and it was used in some of these studies with termites. And that's how I came across that, the name of the color. And it was so evocative to me to think about the River Nile and this color, and this color that makes things visible, that makes things that you're looking for visible. So it's not just anything. But yeah, thanks for asking that question.
I guess Sylvia can also add to this, but also I was thinking, Sylvia, you can also probably see something more about the changes in biology that Mariana was saying, the changes, the way we study.
Well, I guess in recent years, biologists became a bit more aware of their role as to make people understand how other living beings are important for us and for the world in general. Their conservation that is now a very relevant topic for everyone, because as you undoubtedly know, we are facing important modification of our environment, and we as biologists have to take we have the responsibility to make people understand this is important. So we began studying biology in the laboratory in a closed environment. So among us, now we have to go out of the laboratory and start talking to people, making people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and sensibilize, make people more aware of our environment, of our world, and the importance of all living beings, and also insects. Insects are are many species, very, very many species, and are an important part of our world. So we have to make people aware of this.
One of the things that we talked about, I asked you, oh, it's really loud, was like, yeah, when you do this kind of outreach, like when you talk about your work, I asked you, like, or you mentioned maybe that children always ask really nice questions, like,
Yes.
but adults, we have often we have too many preconceptions about what we think we should know, and we're afraid to ask. I mean, it seems obvious, but it's surprising actually how often that actually happens. And part of the problem I see is that as children, like, for example, insects are represented really in strange ways. Like some of them are very friendly and others are not. And you can say something.
Yeah,
about
for
this.
example, in cartoons, insects are often represented in the wrong way. I mean, there can be some mistakes, very, very evident, such as depicting them with 4 legs, for example. But I think this is not the most important mistake. Is that cartoons or other works for children often generate misconceptions about their way of living, about their role in the ecosystems. There are some oversimplifications, for example. I think these works can be important in making children know that insects exist, but they could be better done.
There was a book published in 1937, I think it was, called Termite City. And I love this book because it's a children's book, but it's also really has a lot of valuable information for adults. And it's all made with the woodcut prints. So already the medium and the and the message are well well suited for each other. But
paper also.
Yeah, on paper, exactly. So
paper.
yes, exactly. So it's really, I like these examples of this kind of book, this kind of publication, this kind of message. It's not the kind of thing that I'm doing, actually, I think, but I appreciate that way of thinking and way of working. And I wish there were more of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also what Silvia mentioned. For me, also, it seems like a very important shift of looking at, say, in this case, termites as kind of like metaphors and like model citizens. Like, we look at their society, we kind of like measure ourselves against them, as to looking as part of our like material and cultural history and culture in general.
Yeah. Our culture. In our culture, the role of termites in our culture.
And maybe also our role in their culture.
Oh, well, I don't know if we have a role in their culture. I'm not sure I can ask this question.
As you said, some of them are blind.
Yeah, it's interesting for you that they are blind. Not all of them, actually. Yeah? The royal, those that fly away from the nest have eyes because they have to see where they're going. In our culture as Europeans, termites have not a very important role, as probably you know. You don't probably you have not heard talking about termites a lot in your lives, have you? Because termites lead a secluded life, so it's not easy to find them Mariana told you she looked for them. It's not easy to find termites. You have to know where to search for them. And then you have to dig in the ground or to open the wood. So it's not easy to see them. And people, when they see, for example, swarming alates, which are the most impressive sight termites give of themselves, often mistake them for ants. So even if people see termites, sometimes they don't realize that they're seeing termites. So it's not that in our culture we talk so much about termites. They're one of the less known insects.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I saw some around where I grew up, but I didn't think anything of it. And there they have a kind of a different way of getting rid of them than they do here. So there they were putting the tent over the house or the structure and then fumigating it to poison them, which is pretty bad, I think, for everything living. And here, what was interesting about your study that I read, that's how I really found Silvia actually, was this study where they did this kind of very delicate subterranean termite extermination using a bait system. So let me try to explain it, and if I'm wrong, then you please correct me. But the termites would eat the bait, and then they wouldn't die immediately. They would just pass on a genetic problem, right, to the
because termites living in a colony continuously exchange food. It's called trophallaxis. It means one termite feeds other termites, and they are continuously doing so. So if a termite eats a substance, a toxic substance, it gives it to other termites while it feeds them. And so the substance becomes diffused in all the colony. So it can kill not only the termite who ate it the first time, but all the colony. And this is achieved by using substances that have a delayed effect and kill termites only when they molt, so they shed their exoskeleton. And this happens a few days or even a few weeks after they eat the toxic substance.
Thank you for explaining it, because there's another image of pest control, what could be labeled like pest control culture, which I've been following with great interest because it's really strange, which is like these images of men in protective suits, like spraying everything with poison, and they're really proud of it. Like it's interesting, like as a subculture. I mean, that's one of the things that I found instead of finding termites. Like I found this strange presence of this subculture of this very, it's very masculine too. I mean, it's this very masculine. They like it. They like killing, and they like the image of themselves killing. And there's like, I mean, I have quite a few, like on social media, I have like some exchange with pest control specialists, and so it's really interesting for me, like to be kind of in between. Like they don't know who I am or why I'm interested in termites. They probably think I also want to kill them, but I'm a little bit in disguise in those moments, and I like that because it lets me see the other side of things. It's not all I don't think, it sounds quite polarized, but maybe there's, I don't know. I'm still looking, I think, to try to understand this visual culture also of like showing yourself killing insects. I mean, what is that? I don't know.
I don't understand this. I don't like it.
I don't like killing them either. I think another maybe more like a very interesting approach is the this rise of urban ecology and like citizen science. So this is something else I discovered together with the presence of this pest control, like hashtag pest control life. I experienced it firsthand because I was looking for termites and taking pictures of different insects and different animals that I would find here in Rome, and then upload them to these citizen science websites where there's like a big database, and you can have your photo verified by the community. So it helps to kind of understand what organisms or which organisms are present in which cities and which places, not only cities, but everywhere. And that was really exciting for me because I never thought that I would be participating actively in scientific research. And so that was just like me being on the street, taking snapshots of dead birds and insects, you know, and then trying to find out. And it's interesting, I think, for scientists to use this huge amount of crowd science to understand patterns, right? Is it helpful for you? Like,
well, it is helpful in involving people, and this is very important. As for the usefulness of the data for research, well, it depends. So one has to evaluate them well, because there can be a bias in the way they are collected. For example, people tend to focus on more beautiful species or bigger species. So one has to be a bit careful, but they're interesting projects. They can make people aware of the problem and feeling involved. They can appreciate the science more and animals in general.
Yeah, which makes me wonder, Mariana, maybe it's a little bit of a trick question, but we know you're now in the middle of this project, but you have also been in the middle of your other projects. So I wonder, with that experience, what do you have a certain sense of where you're heading? What this project might bring you, like despite all the, you know, the new research, the new data and so on, like, do you already see it following kind of like a pattern that you have in your work?
I think it's a little bit of process of elimination, like how I work. So, and also with this project. So I know that I don't want to show a photograph of a termite. I don't want to show how they look. I know that I mean, maybe, yeah, I want to create a different narrative. I want to work on a different story about termites. I want to create some intrigue about them, with, I guess, with the hope that it will create intrigue about other living things, not only ourselves. To question also what we are made of, also this kind of all these symbiotic and relationships with organisms already that constitute us. All of these things need to be questioned. So it becomes also a really big philosophical question. I think I like a lot the crossing of time periods. So I like to think about my work and this project not only as happening in 2021, but to think about the layers of history, the archive as a living thing that's stored in the body, that is part of the body. And I guess that's why Rome is also so perfect for this, like as a site, as a situated location for this research and this project, because of its history, because of its layers, because of what has been neglected or deteriorated, what is still yet to be found, and our knowledge of that, we think, anyway, we have a lot of, I mean, some of the people who are the scholars who are here at the KNIR, I think they know a lot more than I do about these things, and they would be able to be much more specific about it. For me, it's very much of a sense, and I'm following a lot my intuition. But I would like to make a story, a better story, and I think that's what the scientists that I really respect now, that's what they're saying too. So I feel like I'm in good company. Like someone like Anna Tsing-Lovenhaupt, who wrote The Mushroom at the End of the World, or fiction writers like Annie Dillard, who wrote Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. It's quite old already, but Donna Haraway, of course, Lynn Margulis, like all of these thinkers who have some connection to science. They're the ones who are saying we need better stories. So I hope to make a better story. That's like the short end of it. Yeah.
Shouldn't be the end of it.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, I'm interested in hearing from you also, Virginia, like how you approach this method of making stories, like and sharing stories, because it's something that you brought up. Actually, we talked about it.
Something I struggle with a lot. And I guess whenever you struggle with something, you end up thinking a lot about it. And there are many, many more people who are much better than me to talk about storytelling and metaphors and narratives. And at some point, I think, actually, it's not true. Indirectly, you brought up the topic, because in the invitation to this event, you wrote about this delineation, no, how do you call it, like distinction between animate and inanimate, and also about, then we probably later we spoke about like writing stories, about how we understand all these study subjects as metaphors and so on. And I started thinking about storytelling and how incredibly important storytelling is in science, but also in communicating science, but also in communicating in general, and how in a way we are a little bit trapped in like very obvious ways of storytelling and of like drama, like no, the 3 acts of the drama, like no, these are the stories we like the most, and despite us liking the other stories, they're usually like modifications of the first. And I love stories, and it made me also think about how they're also inanimate, but how they're also like, for me, stories and patterns is something that is also somewhere in between animate and inanimate worlds. And I was thinking how in your project, it's exactly the storytelling that is helping to cross these boundaries. And then when we continued talking about the subject, you were, I think, saying you were very much against about these, like the old ways of taxonomies and how we separate things into, we try to put them into boxes very clearly. And now we see that even in science, like as Silvia, as you mentioned today, that a lot of differences in science you can only see when you study the DNA, when you study really other things. But, and I guess storytelling and science is like a whole other subject that we could discuss for ages. But this is where I came to the subject. For me, it was something, we spoke today about the love for insects, but also love for inanimate things. And I think the love for stories is probably one of those things that like proves that it's possible. So what kind of a story?
Well, I think about this story of from the book Termite City, because it starts out just like a very, very, very long time ago, you know, before any of your relatives were alive. The first millions of years ago, the first termite ate the first tree. And I would like add to this story like that it didn't eat the tree because it was a killer. It didn't eat a tree because it's a murderer, and those ideas only came later. It ate the tree because that's what termites do. They eat cellulose. So I think we can start to tell. Yeah, I mean, there's another story also, another story about the termite being like in witness protection or something. Like I like to imagine a termite as we have criminalized the termites, right? Like that's the feeling that's when we talk about termites, they're like a danger, they're a threat, they only do bad things, and we see them as great harm to our structures and our livelihood. I mean, there's like an amazing radio play that I heard, a German radio play, where you can hear in the background the two people are having a conversation, and you can hear in the background this tick, 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 tick sound. And it's like the so-called tick talk of death, because it's the sound of the termite eating the wood. And they know that this termite represents, and the sound represents their fall, their downfall. Like they will lose the house, they will have nothing. So generally the termites are criminalized, but I would like to think about them and present them more as like anonymous figures who are protected in the shadows, who because we have imposed some really harsh views on them, now need to be have their voices disguised, or have their faces hidden. I like this idea that we need to act towards them differently. At the same time, like we don't need to really advocate for them. And we were talking about this also, that they're doing pretty well. So yeah.
No, they're not threatened species normally. One can live with termites. For example, taking easy precautions, one can avoid them to make damage. For example, to archives or to buildings. If they are built properly, if archives are managed properly, termites are not really a problem, even if they are present in the ground or in the wood around buildings. So we can live with them. It's our fault when they make big damage, not theirs, like with many other natural events.
But Silvia, what is your kind of imagination about the future of termites? You have been studying them for so long, you probably still imagine something that you would either discover or that would happen next that would...
Well, they're with us since so many centuries. They will continue to be with us in that way. And probably with global warming, many termite species will extend their range to the north of Europe, probably. So people will have to deal with them even in regions where now they are not known. But as we see in Italy, we can live with them, so one can learn.
You told me today the story about how termites were used to find where the gold is buried in the earth.
In some countries, yes. I
And
think in India, if I'm not mistaken, because they, for building their mounds, their nests, the big nests, they dig in the ground. So they take the earth where man can see it. So one, by looking termite mounds, can see if there is gold in the ground. So sometimes they are used for strange things.
yes, I'm also thinking about all the other things useful and like kind of like a lost and found service of the future, maybe a little bit.
Well, in Australia, there are those that are called magnetic mounds, no? Magnetic termites.
Are you kidding me?
They are mounds, termite mounds, nests that are built all aligned in a north-south direction. So you can use them to orient yourself. Because it's just that they don't want to get overheated. So they align the mound so that the sun strikes the largest part only when it's not so high in the sky, so it's not so hot. But you can use them to see where you're going.
Yeah, just makes me think that maybe one of the changes we could make to the vocabulary we're using, you know, they're not only workers. I mean, they're also architects, they're also cleaners,
Yeah.
they're also like doing so many specific things. Their architectural behave, like the innovations that they, what can we call it? The things they do with the way they build are amazing.
Some mounds
some of
are
them.
very complicated, complex.
Yeah. And also, like, there are a lot of architects, right, who study the way that they, some species make kind of air conditioning systems, and they model those ecological air conditioning systems on the termite mounds and how they're made. So it's pretty impressive. We can learn so much from them and those things.
Yes.
Yeah. So architects.
Yeah. Silvia, you said you studied them in your lab, and do you think they also learn something from us, or is it just like one-way street, or do you see some maybe learning some behaviors or architectural tricks, or
I don't even know if they know I exist.
they really don't care, right?
Maybe they see me as a god who gives them food, but I don't think so.
They only see the food.
I could kill them if I wanted. So I'm a god in some way, but I don't use this possibility.
I asked you earlier what was the most surprising thing you found in your research, and you had such a nice response. Maybe you can share it, like about this separating the colonies into smaller groups. Yeah.
We wanted to study how small colonies could grow. So we isolated the groups of workers, each in a petri dish, in the same conditions, and we expected them to do the same things because they were the same number of termites in the same environment. So instead, we saw they did different things. Some of them began to dig into the wood immediately. Others began to build tunnels in the sand. Others just ran around the petri dish all day. So we understood that those that for us were the same thing, were all similar groups, in fact were not, because they behaved differently. So our understanding of their being is not so good.
No, no. I mean, it isn't, is it? I mean, we're trying to understand them. You're trying in your way, and I'm very focused, and I'm trying in my way also, but in a very in a different way. And I still think we can't pin them down, which is maybe which leaves a lot open to the imagination, and I think that's a lot of questions.
Science is about questions.
Yeah,
And
that
maybe art too.
yeah, exactly. So that's where our fields are so similar, and I think that's why it's so funny sometimes when people think that when people I talk to think that like science and art are so separate. They come from the same drive.
It's a
absolutely
need of knowing the world to
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, and knowing that we have so much to learn, that like and that we might be really wrong, but we keep going in some direction, in some pursuit. Yeah.
No, let's hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I always like that. I always like to think about that and talk about that too. This kind of it seems obvious, this crossover between science and art. But I think just one thing that I always feel strangely about is like, for me as an artist, I feel that people expect some visual, like especially visual representation of what I'm doing or thinking about. But I feel a bit more like this termite in the petri dish or something. I mean, it's more meandering. It's more of a process, and you and the people that I'm reading who passed away already, they're all part of that process. So it's really a continuum of generational knowledge exchange and questions. Yeah. I think, well, yeah.
We can also include other people.
Yeah, this is probably a good point, actually, to see if there are any questions from any of you for any of us. Or
But I have to say, I really like this image of contemporary artists, which explains a lot of the artist behavior. That when you expect them to build a mound, they dig a hole somewhere instead. No, but from the very early on, we planned other people joining in the conversation at some point. And so please go ahead, continue. You have seen the drawings and you have heard us speak, and you heard Mariana present as well. So just jump in with or without microphone as you find comfortable.
yeah. There might also be someone online who's watching who has a question, and I think that those questions can be, maybe they can be emailed. I'm not sure. They can be not emailed, but transmitted. Yeah.
Mariana, you mentioned this idea of a living archive several times, but I'm not sure that during this event you said exactly what you mean, like how.
Yeah, I mean, in this, when I'm talking about a living archive, I mean, I'm not only talking about DNA, but I'm talking about, for example, with termites, the way that they pass their microorganisms in their gut from one generation to the next. So we can trace back in a really long time to see what kind of symbiotic relationships were already present, like well, millions of years ago. So humans, we do things a little bit differently. We do pass, I think, some of those microbes on to next generation, but it's not as, I think, complete. So as it is with termites. So I really like to think about the archive as something that happens in the belly and not something that happens in a book. And that sounds strange, but and also the archive is a living archive, and the imagination and all of these things as being housed not only in the brain, the organ that we call the brain, but in the belly and in the skin and in all of these more holistic bodily viewpoints. So it's really problematic when we start to well, I mean, speak for myself, you know, it's when I start to think of the archive or a memory as something that happens, is something that exists in a, like, yeah, in what do I want to say? Yeah, I think yeah, it always has the potential for transformation. It always has the potential to be elastic. It's not something fixed, but it is situated. So it is situated in a space, whether that's geographical space like the city of Rome, or that's a physical space like the intestine. So I see a lot of connections between the archive and the collection of memory and history in bodies and in physical geographical locations. I don't want to dismiss those relationships.
And just to follow up on the first question, I think another idea that was very interesting for me when you dug through the research was this idea of super organ, right? And it's not just one massive organ, right? Like in this drawing. And I was thinking, maybe you could introduce it a little bit, or maybe also Silvia knows, maybe Silvia, you can add later something that fascinates.
Okay.
What are we going?
Yeah, so the superorganism, it's an interesting topic for when you're thinking about the different, when you're thinking about individuality and individual organisms. So the main question is like, what is one individual?
Yes.
When we know, for example, with social insects, that they live in a colony, that they all depend on each other, that they have different roles that are essential to the well-being of the colony. When they build, in the case of termites, when they build structures that are essential to their well-being, and when they cohabitate and have symbiotic relationships with other organisms like mushrooms or other bacteria, microbes.
Yes, it's a deep question, because, for example, we are under the impression of being a single organism, of being a unity, but we are a bunch of cells. Even in our brains, there are different areas that do different things. So what are we? Identity is not an easy concept to describe. In biology, we have examples where it is even more difficult to describe than in animals. For example, in plants, if you take sometimes a piece of a plant, you detach it from the mother plant and you plant it somewhere, it can live. So is the same individual, or is it something else? Or for example, in bacteria, when they reproduce, they become two individuals starting from one, but none of them is really the original one. So the idea, but nobody died. So where did the individual go? It's difficult.
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot also with this was in immunology, and that was something that I was really interested in, and that kind of which led me on the path towards some really key texts that I read for this research about lichen and about symbiotic relationships. But for example, when a body accepts a prosthetic device, or when there's yeah, we all know now a lot about viruses, but when we think about the host relationship and how blurry these boundaries are and how blurry they become and how time dependent they are. I mean, I think that's really important to remember, like this time element. It's not fixed. You might be more yourself at one point than you are at another point, or less of yourself. Like, yeah.
Think of illnesses of the brain, for example. Which is the real person, the one it was or the one it is now.
Yeah, so all these questions are so endless in a way, and yeah, good, we have a question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you so much for this interesting presentation and this discussion that you're having. I was intrigued by it, first of all, and I, as you might know, Mariana knows it, I am actually working myself on the art-science relationship, but then in the early modern period, so in the 16th, 17th century mainly. And actually I have two questions for Mariana, and the second one is also for Silvia. And my first question, I mean, you already answered it a little bit, and I think you're still in the middle of your process. You probably cannot answer it completely, but I was wondering what kind of end product are you thinking of producing? It's a little bit of question was already asked by Virginia, but you just talked about, in response to her question, about telling a story, telling a different story. But we see here on the floor, we see drawings. So this is more a visual representation. So are you thinking then about telling a story visually, or are you thinking about telling a story in mixed media, writing it? Because I know you're also you're a writer, so or something else altogether. And then the second question is related to this, but it's more specific about the art-science relationship. What do you think you can learn or take away from science, from biology, from Silvia, for instance, just to name the scientist who is here next to you, or more in general? Yeah. And vice versa. Silvia, what do you think you can learn something from art for your work? I also was wondering, of course, about that. How do you feel that, and how would you, how would that work? First, the question is for both of you, but vice versa.
Okay, yeah, try to remember both. The first question, I think, yeah, like, you know, like I said, it's still very much in the middle. I'm in the middle of the process, but I started writing a story. So I guess I'm trying to verbalize things in words. Yeah, put them in words. And initially, I really wanted to make a very graphically oriented book. So a book that would be mostly images. But I'm really not sure now. I'm really thinking about that, how to negotiate it with my problem with the images of termites. And with the video that I'm working on, I have a few leads where I am now. For example, I'm working with someone who makes 3D renders and making kind of a fictional space that doesn't exist in, you know, out there, but exists digitally, and to then show a video within that space. So it's kind of a screening, a movie screening for an audience that isn't there. That's one thing I'm playing with right now. And as for what I can learn from scientists like Silvia, so much. so much. I think, but one of the biggest things is the approachability of science. I think what you have done through our conversations is demystifying it. I mean, it's not to say that I have a easy grasp. I know that what you do is very complex and very well researched, and you have a much deeper knowledge than I will reach, but you have also some knowledge that helps me to say, look, this is how you find termites. Like, we can go out and look for them. So that kind of approachability has been so valuable to me. So I think that's what I think I can learn from scientists. Yeah.
Well, I like to see the world by different perspectives. And I think zoology is a bit about that. You know, studying animals, you get to understand them a bit. Probably I will never know how it is to be a termite or another animal. But just a bit, knowing them better, can give me this idea. And talking with artists is understanding another perspective of seeing the world, of seeing insects and termites. So is something that opens my mind to different ways of approaching them. And to understand, to explain things to others, this is also very important. And to approach others and to make them understand what I do. So it's an exchange. It's something that, yes, I think I can learn from artists. One can learn always by talking with people, with interesting people. So I like being here. I'm happy to be here tonight.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for a really fascinating hour that I just spent. I learned a lot about termites, but also about, let's say, sort of how we as people position ourselves towards the rest of the world, I suppose. And I wondered, it's a question for Mariana, it's triggered a bit by what you were saying before Matthijs posed his question about how also in this termite world, identities are not fixed, and you know, there are several levels, and these are, I suppose, the kinds of questions that also in the human world we struggle with, right? And that made me think, so how did your getting to know termites better also perhaps change your own relation with them? Because you started out by saying that, you know, they kind of replaced the Japanese monks in being this very tranquil sort of eternal reality that never changes. But then I suppose by looking better at them, you suddenly see that also there are, you know, huge problems, there's huge dynamics. So I just wondered, well, what happened to you and your relation to the termites in this entire process?
Such a great question. Yeah, I think I'm still figuring it out, how they are changing me and how my thinking about them has changed. Maybe it's you know, it's like what you said about, like, you were wondering if they have disagreements and stuff. So like, maybe it's a relief also to think about, yeah, I mean, yeah, we have it. Yeah, we really want to understand them through our eyes and our perspective, and we know that we can't. And maybe that's that's what it is, right? Like, that we also can't understand ourselves entirely either, like why we do what we do. And I keep asking this question, like, what do they do? Why are they doing, why are they doing this? They're just doing it because they're doing it. And that's kind of that's this kind of a easy answer, but at the same time, it's true. why do I make drawings? Why do I think about, why do I have these silly questions? Not silly, but why do I have these questions? Why do I bring them to here to talk about it? Like, it's what we do. It's what I do. So maybe thinking about termites is, yeah, is a good model for just being alive.
Silvia, do you think they have questions? The termites. I think it can, questions are amazing, of course, but it can bring you this certain peace to think of a world without questions once in a while as well.
Maybe it's a bit a crazy question. I was really fascinated by your presentation, and there are two words that are important to me that you said in the conversation. The first is imagination, and I associate imagination with freedom, or the idea to create something that doesn't exist, or to be free to do something different than what you expect to do. So this is your art project. So you are telling your story about the termites, but what if you could imagine how the termites would tell their own story, as they are free to move in a different way, in a way that you didn't expect? Let's try to imagine how the termites would tell their own story. I think it would help also to reconnect to nature, to change the perspective. I know it's a crazy question, but how they could tell their own story.
I think it's a great question. I don't think it's a crazy question. It's really difficult. I don't have an answer for that. I mean, that's how could they? But I think maybe the question itself is already, it already brings us somewhere. Yeah, how can termites tell their own story? It's like there's some discussion about this in like environmental literature and kind of ecological criticism, like how would a landscape speak, or like how would yeah, how would the landscape tell its own story? And there's some really great like examples in novels and fiction that I love. I think those are really inspiring ways of thinking about it, but everybody does it differently. Every author, every artist does it, kind of imagines it differently. There's this, I was telling them earlier, so you've heard the story already, but there's a Marguerite Duras film set in Rome from 1980. And in the beginning of that film, there's a shot of the Tiber Island. And on that island, you see a few people passing by, a few people walking, and you see like cars passing overhead above on the bridge. And you also see a tree. And when I was in Rome in the fall, I was photographing trees, looking at trees, and I found this beautiful tree that had started to swallow the sidewalk. And I saw, when I watched that film, there is that tree 40 years ago, it's the same one. So what if we think about it, instead of like in the films that we watch, in the books that we read, in the art that we see and think about, and all of these stories, like what if we think about the tree as the protagonist? And that, I mean, it's a nice shift, at least as an exercise. So, I mean, it might sound like a crazy question, but when you start to put it into practice as a emotional exercise or as an intellectual exercise, I think there's some possibility for things to shift a little bit. And yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Hi. First, thanks for your presentation. That is really fascinating. My question is about the termites as art builder. I mean, okay. I just I should not have pressed it. I was saying termites as art builders. I mean, we talk about their habits, but not about their product. And surprisingly, I would like to tell you that every time I show some picture, I am a book conservator. And when I talk about pest control in libraries, every time I show some picture of the damage made by termites, especially to to kids, they are attracted by the result of the work of the termite instead of that result as a damage and on the book. And as well as the work of the termites, for example, creating tunnels on the wall to reach the book or to reach the shelves. I have a good, a lot of picture about that. And my question is, at least, are you going to investigate also that topic?
Well, yeah, a little bit. I've been doing a lot of internet research about books eaten by termites and other insects because they're so indeed so beautiful. And well, actually, you even showed me some really beautiful books eaten by wood beetles, by beetles actually. I thought in the beginning of this, I thought I would try to emulate that process, like that, to actually eat away at something, to become like a termite myself. And then I thought also, like we talked about, that I would make a work for termites to eat, something that they could eat and enjoy, like a book, like a really big one, like the yeah, they enjoy books. They know what books are. We don't. They realize that they're also food, and that for them it's something else. I'm not sure. Yeah, I like this visually. I like it a lot too. There and metaphorically, and also imaginatively, like the creation of negative space on a page, or the creation of negative space in the world is so potent. It's such a potent activity. I mean, so yeah.
Between art and damage is not always so clear, isn't it? For example, Mount Rushmore, what is it? Is it art or a rock that was damaged?
Or woodcuts. I mean, also it's a similar process of a process of taking away, of removing, and instead of building on top of something. I don't know, maybe you think of something comes to mind.
No, but now we can talk about science and damage for another hour and a half.
Yeah. So, good question. Well, I think we're actually at the end of about the end of this conversation, unless someone else had a last question. Oh, yeah.
Thank you for your fascinating conversation. First of all, I must say that I learned a lot about termites today, and they got me intrigued. And you touched upon lots of different aspects of their living and many different functions that they play within the colony, and also the epistemological problems with us understanding them and how we can bridge that gap. And I'm wondering if you identified this one thing that got you inspired to learn more about termites. Whether there was something that triggered you like personally, or there was something more regarding their otherness or something else. I'm curious to hear if you know.
Oh yeah, there is. It's yeah, quite personal, but I think it has to do with yeah, feeling like there's some power in deterioration, and there's something important about loss, and there's something important about decomposition, and there's life in that too. So yeah, I think that's but yeah, but then I mean, I think it grew from there, because I was thinking about I mean, this project really started to evolve, like as the pandemic was starting to evolve at the same time. So there were a lot of questions for me about immunity and the colony life, and the way that we can find parallels and behaving as a group versus behaving as individuals, and all of these actions that are interconnected and how they affect each other. Yeah. So it was a good timing, I think, for this this dive into the deep blue. Thank you. I think we can conclude. Thank you so much for your attention and for your presence. Thank you for the KNIR for hosting us, and thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Silvia. And thank you for those listening online. I think we can have a break. Thank you.